The morning, the wind turned sharp as a blade. Colt Mercer spotted two figures standing beside the frozen creek, small as pencil marks against the vast winter plain. Snow drifted in slow spirals, catching the pale light like falling ashes. His horse snorted, hooves crunching over brittle frost. And as he drew closer, the smaller silhouette, no more than a boil, leaned heavily on the taller one. The woman lifted her chin with a kind of weary bravery and called out, her breath breaking into a cloud of white. "Can you take us to town?" Her voice wavered, but did not fall apart. Like a thread pulled tight but not snapped, Colt reined in his horse, studying her with the quiet patience of a man who'd learned not to rush a stranger's desperation. The woman's face was flushed with cold, strands of wind-tangled hair half frozen against her cheeks. Her brother, he assumed. It was her brother lying on her shoulder, trying to hide his trembling. Colt's gaze paused on the boy's cracked lips, the shallow breaths, the pallor beneath wind-burned skin. The urgency was unmistakable. "Town's a long ride in this weather," Colt said softly, more observation than refusal. The woman didn't flinch. She simply met his eyes with an honesty so stark it startled him. "We have no choice," she murmured, tightening her arm around the boy. "He can't walk much farther." Colt nodded once, a decision made as naturally as exhaling. "All right then. Climb up." He dismounted, lifting the boy with unexpected gentleness. The woman's gloved hands shook as she helped settle him against the saddle. Colt noticed how she winced when she stretched tired, cold, protecting someone who weighed heavy on her heart as much as her body, when she mounted behind her brother. The horse shifted under the new weight, but she steadied herself with quiet grace. Her fingers hovered uncertainly before resting lightly against Colt's coat as he settled into the saddle in front of them. It was the softest touch, hesitant connection, born not of trust but necessity. They set off through the whitening landscape, their breaths rising like ghosts. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It held shape and meaning, like a fragile truce. The boy's head rested on Colt's back, and the woman leaned forward ever so slightly to shield him from the wind. Colt felt the tremor of her exhaustion travel through the fabric of his coat. And he realized she had been walking far longer than was safe in this weather. Snow thickened, turning the world into a muted dreamscape. The woman's voice came suddenly, small but sharp with guilt. "I'm sorry to trouble you." "It's no trouble," Colt replied. "Winter tests us all." She fell quiet again, as if afraid her words might cost something she could not afford. As they crested a hill, the town emerged below, a scattering of buildings wrapped in smoke and frost. The kind of place where rumors traveled faster than stagecoaches. Colt felt the woman stiffen behind him. Her breath caught, and he sensed her battling something unseen. Fear? Shame? Or perhaps the memory of a door once slammed in her face. "You all right?" he asked without turning. "I'll manage," she whispered. Though nothing in her voice sounded certain, the horse slowed as they reached the first patch of packed snow marking the town road. A few faces turned toward them, shopkeepers sweeping their steps, ranch hands hauling hay, women gathering water. Their eyes followed the trio with the sharpness of hawks. Colt felt the familiar prickle of judgment rising from the street like heat from a forge. He slid off the saddle and lifted the boy again, the child's weight limp as his fever deepened. The woman dismounted carefully, but stumbled as her boots hit the ground. Colt steadied her with a single hand on her elbow. She jerked slightly at the touch, pride or fear. He couldn't tell, but she didn't pull away. People began to murmur. The sound crawled under the skin. "Is that Eloise Hartley?" Someone hissed. She came back. Another whispered. "Thought she had the sense to stay gone. Her kind only brings trouble." Eloise's cheeks reddened, not from cold, but from those words landing like blows. She inhaled sharply, gathering herself as if sewing her dignity together stitch by stitch. Colt shot a hard glance at the onlookers, and though he said nothing, his presence carried weight. His reputation for fairness and his capacity for silent intimidation gave the crowd pause. "Where's the doctor?" Colt asked. "Closed till noon," someone muttered, and though no one said it aloud, the meaning hung heavy. Not for her. Not today. Eloise's face tightened, but she swallowed every emotion with practiced restraint. "We just need medicine," she said quietly. "And warmth." Colt nodded toward the general store and motioned for her to follow. As they stepped inside, the heat of the stove washed over them, though it did nothing to melt the tension. Silas Brogan, the storekeeper, looked up from his ledger and froze, his features tightening like a rope pulled to taut. "Well," Silas drawled, "look who decided to crawl back." Eloise lowered her gaze, her shoulders tightening ever so slightly. Colt sensed the history between them like a storm cloud he couldn't yet see but could feel brushing the air. "We need medicine," Colt said plainly, setting Bram gently on a wooden crate. The boy whimpered, a low, fevered sound. Silas sighed loudly. "I remember her father still owing for last winter's seed. No credit left for her." Eloise's eyes flickered shame, anger, pleading, but she didn't speak. She seemed determined not to beg. Colt stepped forward, jaw set with an unspoken warning. "Put it on my tab." Silas hesitated, then grudgingly grabbed a bottle from the shelf. Eloise watched the exchange with a tightness around her eyes. The humiliation was suffocating her. Colt could tell, but she masked it with stillness. The way someone tries not to bleed after being cut. When they stepped back outside, snowflakes drifted lazily, catching in her hair like white petals. She clutched the medicine, her breath trembling. Colt noticed she held herself very straight as if her spine were the last piece of pride she refused to surrender. "Thank you," whispered. The words were small, careful, as though she feared they might fracture. Colt studied her face more closely now. Beneath the frostbite and exhaustion, there was a rare steadiness, a quiet endurance carved from hardship. "Anyone would have helped," he said. Her eyes flickered over the staring townsfolk, their narrowed faces, their guarded whispers. "Not everyone," she murmured. They walked toward Colt's wagon, the weight of the medicine bottle between them like an unsaid truth. The boy coughed, a thin, painful sound, and Eloise's composure faltered. She pressed a gloved hand to his forehead, lips trembling. "We'll get 'em warm soon," Colt reassured her. She nodded, though worry shadowed every line of her face. As they approached the wagon, the deputy stepped into their path. Rourke Howell tipped his hat to Colt but kept his eyes fixed on Eloise, stern but not unkind. "Heard you were back," the deputy said. "You planning on staying long?" Eloise hesitated. Her voice was brittle when she answered, "Only as long as I need to." Rourke's gaze softened, but his tone remained cautious. "Just be mindful. Folks remember things even when they ought not to." Colt's jaw tightened. "She's not causing trouble." "I didn't say she was," the deputy replied. "Just be careful." Eloise lowered her gaze again, absorbing the warning like someone accustomed to swallowing stones. The deputy stepped aside, allowing them through. Colt helped Bram into the wagon and wrapped him with blankets he'd laid out earlier. Eloise climbed in beside the boy, her hands shaking as she tucked the blanket under his chin. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the snow falling in slow motion, the cold air stilling, the judgment fading into muffled distance. Colt watched Eloise smoothing Bram's hair with trembling fingers, her face softening with a love fierce enough to withstand any winter. There was something in her silence, a story she was refusing to burden the world with, a truth she was fighting to protect. Colt climbed onto the wagon seat, gripping the reins with steady hands. "We'll go slow," he said quietly. "The snow's getting thicker." Eloise nodded, meeting his gaze with a gratitude too fragile for words as the wagon began to move. She looked back at the town, the crooked signs, the watching eyes. The snow-swept street tanned something and her expression shifted. It was not hope nor fear, but a quiet reckoning. As though stepping into that wagon marked the first step in a long path. She never meant to walk again. Yet, even as the town disappeared behind them, Eloise remained, turned slightly toward it, as though bracing for a shadow she knew would follow. The wind picked up. The road narrowed. Bram's breathing deepened with every bump of the wagon. Colt glanced back at the woman who held her brother as if holding the last piece of her world. The snow kept falling. Soft but relentless, and in that quiet white silence, something unspoken formed between them, a fragile thread, still thin, still trembling, but undeniably there, and though neither of them said it aloud, both carried the sense that the worst of this story had not yet arrived. The wagon jolted over hidden ruts, the cold biting through worn blankets as Colt Mercer guided the horse steadily along the frostbitten trail. Bram's breathing was shallow, a fragile rhythm that wrenched at Eloise's heart. She sat rigid beside him, fingers clutching the edge of the woolen shawl wrapped tight around her brother's frail frame. Her eyes, shadowed by exhaustion, flickered toward Colt with a mix of gratitude and an unspoken plea for hope. Suddenly, Bram's small body convulsed, a shudder breaking through the cold stillness. Eloise gasped, bending over him as if to shield him from the harsh winter itself. "Bram," she whispered, trembling, her voice breaking like thin ice underfoot. Colt acted without hesitation, sliding down to lift the boy into his arms, careful as if holding a flame that might flicker out with the slightest wrong move. His hands were steady, calm, a lifeline in the frozen haze. The world around them seemed to hush, the wind folding into silence as if waiting. Eloise's breath came ragged and uneven. Shame and fear warred within her, tightening like a noose she couldn't untie. The wagon's wheels slowed to a reluctant stop near the town's edge, where smoke curled from chimneys and dim lights flickered behind frost-lined windows. Yet the faces watching from the street remained closed, a wall of indifference cloaked in whispered gossip. A sudden creak of a wooden porch drew their attention. From the shadows stepped Maeve Calder, the town's widow, whose kindness was spoken of in hushed tones, like a secret blessing. Her eyes, sharp yet tender, rested on Bram's pale face. Without a word, she beckoned a silent command that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Colt followed, the boy cradled against his chest, and Eloise trailed, her hope fragile as the thin glass of the medicine bottle she still held. Inside Maeve's cabin, warmth wrapped around them like a soft embrace. The scent of pine and burning cedar soothed the chill from their bones. Maeve's hands moved with practiced gentleness, plying poultices and murmuring words in a language that felt older than the stones outside. Eloise's shoulders sagged as tears slipped unbidden down her cheeks. The shame that had shadowed her since stepping foot in town melted momentarily in Maeve's quiet acceptance. "You came back because you had to," Maeve said softly, her voice a thread weaving through the silence. "That's courage. Not many have it." Eloise looked up, startled by the simplicity of the truth. She had carried her burden in silence, convinced that return meant only defeat. But here, in this flickering firelight, the idea of bravery took on a new shape, one molded by love and desperation rather than pride. Hours passed as the storm outside thickened, the wind rattling the cabin walls like a restless spirit. Eloise spoke at last, her voice low and raw, unraveling the past she'd fought to bury. Her father's debts, whispered accusations, and the day she was sent away banished by a town quick to find a scapegoat. Bram's illness had forced her hand, pulling her back to a place she'd vowed never to call home. Each word was a step toward something fragile and unknown. Colt listened without interruption. Clay's steady, the quiet understanding in his eyes, cutting through the fog of her shame. He saw not a woman marked by scandal, but one shaped by survival and fierce love. There was no need for empty reassurances. His presence alone spoke volumes. In the flickering shadows, a connection formed, unspoken but profound, fragile as frost yet undeniable. Just as hope seemed to root itself in the warmth of the cabin, the sharp scrape of boots on the porch shattered the fragile peace. Silas Brogan appeared in the doorway, flanked by a handful of townsfolk whose faces were etched with suspicion and resentment. Their voices were low but heavy with accusation, stirring the air like a sudden winter storm. "You're harboring trouble," Silas hissed, eyes locked on Eloise. "This town doesn't need more shadows from the past." Elise's body trembled. But she stood tall, the weight of years pressing down yet refusing to break her spirit. "I have never harmed this town," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strength born from suffering. "You needed someone to blame, and I was there." The room fell silent, the truth settling like fresh snow. Pure and unyielding, Doc Colt stepped forward, his voice calm but unflinching. "She asked for a ride to town. I told her only if she promised to return home. Seems she's been searching for that home all along, and it's been waiting here, whether you saw it or not." His words fell like a slow, steady flame, melting the ice of judgment around them. The crowd wavered. The fierce certainty of their prejudice softened by the innocence of Bram's small form resting in Colt's arms. Slowly, the anger in their eyes faded into something like understanding, hesitant but real. Maeve moved beside Eloise, offering a steadying hand, a silent vow of protection. Bram stirred, his eyelids fluttering open to reveal glassy eyes that searched the room. Relief spread through Eloise like a rising sun, softening the hard edges of her fatigue. The boy's fragile breath deepened, a promise that life, like winter, could be harsh but not unyielding. Colt glanced at Eloise, the faintest trace of a smile brushing his lips. "Once he's strong, I'll take you both back to the ranch," he said quietly. "A place to rest, away from the cold and the whispers." She hesitated, the old fears flickering across her face, but then nodded an acceptance born not of words but of small, steady gestures. As the storm outside eased into a gentle snowfall, the room felt lighter, filled with the fragile beginnings of hope. The promise of home whispered between hearts, hung in the air like a new season dawning slow and sure. Some come seeking forgiveness. Others seek shelter. But the bravest seek their own worth, rising quietly against the cold tides of judgment. And sometimes, in the soft turning of a winter's day, strangers become family, and broken pasts begin to heal in the warmth of unexpected grace. If you felt the sting of exile or the ache of a place that won't hold you, remember this: every soul carries winter inside, but with patience and kindness. Even the deepest frost can thaw. 4 more stories carved from the wind and dust. Of the Wild West where hearts are tested and hope rides alongside hardships, and journey with us into the next tale.